there's been a lot of myths about him, and that kind of brings me to my first question, Nick, which is about the myths surrounding who you are. I know online there's a lot of things about how people have thought you were dead, and then there were things about something going on with Quentin Tarantino, and I just wanted to know how you felt about the fact that there's all these myths out there about you.
Well, such myths are constructed as disinformation to misguide people, and it's an indication that I must be pushing somebody's buttons who's in control and wants people to be diverted from the truth.
Mm. So do you know how that rumor got started about you being dead, and like where that came from?
That was instigated by jealous filmmakers who were upset by an article I wrote in the Underground Film Bulletin, which was critical of a film that I was in. They decided to embark on a character assassination campaign utilizing a magazine in Los Angeles, which then spewed this misinformation that misled people for several years until Henry Rollins published my book.
Cleared up at this point? Do people still contact you about that stuff?
No, that's ancient history. It's irrelevant.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So I wanted to, there's a whole lot of things I want to ask you about, but in terms of just staying with that myth thing for just a second, one of the more recent things, I know that I had started the death stripping community on LiveJournal, and I was just curious. A lot of people said, if you go in that community, you get like attacked by all these random people, and people saying like Nick Zedd has all these different names that you go under, and I'm wondering, is that someone pretending to be you? Is it you? Is it a project? Someone said it was a commentary, so I don't know if you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Well, I've been anonymously stalked online for the last 9 years. And,
so it's something that's someone who's not you. You feel like that's sort of like a continuation of that character assassination from previous?
Right. It's just from a different source, though. There's many jealous people in the world, and if they could get at every celebrity, they would. I'm just more accessible because sometimes I write on a weblog. And
right.
Because there are fans who have made this cinema transgression LiveJournal, it's a way for a certain people who want to discredit me or divert attention to get through.
Okay. So the Underground Film Bulletin, when did you start that? When did that first come out?
That was in 1984.
And how many issues of that did you do? Do you remember?
There were 9 issues which I put out using a pseudonym, since the magazine was not about self-promotion.
Okay, and I've never seen it, but is it like cut and paste? How did you put it together?
Yeah, it was all cut and paste, and hopefully there'll be a book of it coming out this year.
That would be great. And so what brought you to make that zine? Like, what brought you to make zines in the first place? Like, I'm always curious how people find out about them and start making them, and what drives them to make a magazine.
It was due to the frustration
who makes them myself.
The local media not doing their job when the newspapers and media covering filmmaking had basically subjected me to a censorship of omission, by which I was locked out, ignored, and marginalized. It wasn't just me, though. It was other filmmakers I noticed who were making films in Super 8 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was wait until there were 2 or 3 other filmmakers making work similar to me, and then I was able to start writing about these people and put out this fanzine, which I surreptitiously printed in the copy room at School of Visual Arts or any other place that had a copy machine I could sneak in and use. The magazine got a lot of attention, actually. people realized it was telling the truth that you don't get from the media, from the local papers, who are all dependent on corporate funding and advertising, which destroys the dissemination of truth.
Mhm. Would you? What made you stop making the zine?
I made so many enemies by telling the truth in the magazine. When you when you have critical capabilities and you employ them to analyze in an honest way, you will find yourself making enemies. I didn't really care that much about the enemies until they decided to attack me with lies and misinformation in publications that had a wider circulation. But in addition to that, it was costing a lot of, more money than it did originally, since the clampdown occurred in the art schools where you couldn't go in and use the copy machines anymore. I started to pay to print them, and the magazine was quite subversive, I guess, since a lot of people were really excited by it and interested in reading it and always asking when it would come out, since I was the only person writing about a lot of the more cutting-edge filmmakers at the time. And,
is that something that people can, like, if I wanted to see it or somebody listening to this wanted to see it, is it something that's still something you can get your hands on? Do you still sell them, like old copies, or are they kind of just sitting?
Yes, they're available on my website. If you go to nickzedd.com, you can purchase all the back issues.
That's cool. Would you, so I guess that kind of answers my next question, which is if you would ever think of making a new issue or doing a zine again in the future.
I think that I'm not interested in repeating myself. What I do now is I'm communicating in a different media and different forms. I'm making custom clothing where images from my films are being marketed to reach a wider audience. It's nice to see people walking around advertising my films. And also I have the TV show, which gets into people's living rooms, which is far more subversive.
So it's just not the medium for you anymore. It's just like that it served its purpose at the time, basically.
Right. Well, I mean, if the world hadn't changed so much, and if the simulation hadn't enveloped us like a giant amoeba in the last 20 years, I might still be doing a fanzine. But the way it is now, the big problem is landlords who keep raising rents, and businesses have been put out or closed down because they couldn't afford the rents. So where would I actually sell the fanzine? I used to be able to leave them at bookstores or underground theaters and different places that no longer exist. And I didn't sell them for that much. But then there was also Fact Sheet 5, which doesn't come out anymore, that would review the fanzines. I don't know. Actually, I mean, it's great if people still do it.
Yeah. It's actually it's still really big. It's actually, I don't know, there's a whole world of zines going through the mail, which is pretty cool. So I'm always curious about artists who may not be doing zines anymore, like you, for example, but who have that zine history, because